Hey everyone, this is Steve from GamersNexus.net, and today we're looking at NZXT's H440 mid-tower ATX case. I first showed you this case back at CES 2014, where we had the tenacity to call it, quote, an innovator and the most promising case of 2014. I will spoil this review for you ahead of time and say that it certainly did not disappoint. So what is the H440? NZXT's H440 is part of their H series of cases. Big surprise. Like the H230 and H630, which flank the H440's price point and feature set on either side of it. The H series tends to be tied to silence and discretion when it comes to design and selling points, whereas the Phantom series tends to be a bit more cooling or enthusiast focused and a bit less discreet. It has more of a quote-unquote gamer look to the outside. As a general rule, the H series cases and Phantom series cases both have respective styles in this regard that persist throughout the products within that line. The paneling really does not change other than size. So first and foremost, this case comes with a power supply shroud, which is pretty cool. This traditionally has only been seen in modded cases and very high-end enthusiast cases like the Antec 1900, and I think the Corsair 900D, I want to say, has some kind of shroud equivalent. But this is a shroud that's it curves really nicely with the case. It has a chiseled out NZXT period logo. You can't ever, of course, forget NZXT's period. And that conceals the ugly power supply cabling in such a way that even non-modular PSU cables can be contained. One other important thing to note, the case does not have any 5¼ inch external optical drive chambers, so you won't be able to put an optical drive in here, but that's not a big deal. Just use USB to install your OS. And other than that, the only thing you really lose are the cool front panels. The shroud paneling continues up the side of the drive scaffolding and conceals all 6 drive bays to keep a cleaner overall look, so it's not quite as ugly with the scaffolding visible. And aesthetically, the H440 ships in either black on white or red on black options, with white being glossy and black being matte as the base colors. Surprisingly, I noticed that NZXT's white paint didn't tarnish and smudge as easily as some of the other paint materials that we've worked with. It might be that the case is using a similar paint to what Corsair has developed, which would reduce the aging effect of light on the white and reduce some of the smudging. It's got rather plain paneling all around and grilled vent intakes on the sides of the top and front panels. Air can also be taken in through the bottom of the front panel and through the bottom PSU fan, of course, which then gets spat out the back. This ties into their appeal to discretion. There's no direct front or direct top intake or exhaust. No mesh in those places. Under all the thick metal and plastic paneling hides 3 120mm front intake fans and 1 140mm rear exhaust fan, all 4 installed stock. The chassis will support an additional 3 120mm top fans with no bottom fan support due to the nature of the PSU shroud. And if liquid is more of your thing, the H440 can mount up to a 360mm radiator in the top and front positions by removing the modular drive cages. A couple of cases support this right now, but no one really tops Thermaltake's T81 and V71, which support upwards of 420mm radiators. Pretty massive in the front and top. Still, those are a completely different audience from the H440, so it's not a direct comparison. The H440 is still one of the best of its size, a mid-tower ATX, to fit a 360mm radiator, especially at the $120 price point. Beyond cooling, ease of installation features run rampant and have made all the right tweaks to get me excited about reviewing cases again, believe it or not. We look at a lot of cases, and I'm going to be honest, guys, the Phantom series, I am so tired of looking at because they all look the same. They perform pretty similarly. They're good cases. They're just not always exciting to review. So this one was awesome to look at, plain and simple. First of all, NZXT has eliminated their flimsy, rage-inducing drive sleds for something more sturdy and metal-y in that it is made of metal. And I've been complaining about these since I reviewed the Phantom 820 years ago. When I noticed the welcome change at NZXT's CES suite, I said, hey, you got rid of the plastic sleds I complained about in every review I ever wrote. To which they replied, yeah, You and everyone else, we listen to the feedback. So it's always good to hear that a company isn't too full of themselves to actually learn from others. So that's kind of promising from a company standpoint. Anyway, back to ease of installation. They've also tacked on thumb screws that don't actually remove all the way, but still release their tension. It's silly stuff, but it's cool. You don't need to remove the screw all the way to get the panel off. So if you're like me and you have thumb screws all over your house, this problem kind of is eliminated in that regard. Other ease of installation features include the cable management pass-throughs on the power supply shroud and in the board panel, of course, where you can easily route your cables and stuff the excess into the PSU compartment. I would recommend running your video card power through the frontmost PSU cutout, your front panel and USB and HD audio through the back two PSU cutouts, and the rest through the obvious spots on the motherboard mounting panel. Pretty standard stuff. Before getting to the benchmark, I've only got two worthwhile complaints to mention. First, the case uses a 4-pin Molex power connector for either the fan hub or the LEDs, and I'd really prefer that we move away from Molex connectors entirely and just replace them with SATA headers in the future. They're far more convenient, and I mean, really, what do you use Molex for other than stuff that's in a case or the random fan controller that isn't SATA? So that's something I do want to see go away, but not a big ding to the score. The other complaint would be shallow cable management depth on the rear side. This is pretty easily overlooked given the huge amount of space within the power supply shroud. If you look at square inches, I'm sure it far and away exceeds anything else out there. But that said, my 24-pin cable was still a bit too fat and required some serious finagling to get the panel to close. So that was another, I mean, a couple more millimeters would have been awesome. Neither of these dock any real points from the case, though. Let's jump into benchmarks. You can check the full review linked in the description below for our test methodology and bench specs. In terms of benchmark performance, the H440 is around average for CPU cooling and dead last for GPU cooling performance. I was curious about these results and reran the tests, but was met with similar results, so I figure this is primarily because of the thick paneling and focus on silence and the damping material and all that other stuff, in addition to the smaller intake ports for air. So performance wasn't awful, it just wasn't phenomenal. It wouldn't stop me from buying the case unless I were planning to dump a 290X in there with a 220 watt CPU or something. But if you're doing that, you should be running liquid anyway and taking advantage of that liquid cooling support. Overall, I'm actually pretty stoked about the H440. It's not the best performing on the bench for cooling, but the 1 to 2 degrees it lags behind, I mean, honestly, it's a couple degrees delta across the entire bench chart. The couple degrees it lags behind are easily made up for by its quality build materials and its top-tier ease of installation features and the overall aesthetic, and generally just being a fun case to work with. I was very happy with it, and at 120 bucks, all day long, I'd pick that if you're in the mid-range market. The black and red version is also available if you're not much of a fan of this color, so check that out too. That's all for this review. Check the link in the description below for the full article, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you liked this video. It helps a lot, and I will see you all next time. Peace.